The bodies of over 3,200 U.S. forces lie all over the China-Taiwan Strait. Over 10,000 Chinese citizens are dead, and Taiwan is mourning over 3,500 casualties. And that is just the start. Most of the 30,000 Chinese survivors on Taiwanese land are now prisoners of war. While all this has not happened yet, it is the reality of things should China invade Taiwan, at least if the result of wargame simulations carried out by a U.S. think tank, Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, are anything to go by. In this video, we dive deeper into these military implications and explore all other possible outcomes and ramifications of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, including the economic and political consequences of such a conflict. And be sure to watch to the end. We will reveal the shocking odds of a China-Taiwan war happening. Let's get started.
Taiwan would be unable to resist the use of force by an increasingly assertive China.
So what would happen if China invaded Taiwan? Asking this question does not come from nothing. Since 1949, tensions between Taipei and Beijing have placed the region in an unprecedented and uncertain standing. On the one hand, Beijing continues to view the island's democratic government as a challenge to its authoritarian rule and has never taken the use of force off the table to get what it wants. On the other hand, the majority of Taipei is not impressed with the Chinese government and would do anything to maintain its independence. But how did it all start? Let's go back in time. After World War II ended in 1945, Taiwan was handed over to the Republic of China, or ROC, from the Empire of Japan. 4 years later, in 1949, when the Chinese Civil War began favoring the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, the Republic of China government, led by the Kuomintang, or KMT, retreated to Taiwan and set up a temporary capital in Taipei. As that happened, the CCP established the People's Republic of China, or PRC, government in Beijing. Ever since, the relationship between the governments in Beijing and Taipei has been pretty tense and unstable. In fact, in the early years, there were military conflicts and both governments were competing to be seen as China's real government. But after Taiwan became a democracy, the focus shifted to whether Taiwan should become politically unified with mainland China or become an independent nation. And that is the bone of contention between China and Taiwan, seeing as the PRC isn't too fond of the idea of Taiwanese independence and still claims the island as its own. In fact, concerns of an all-out war emerged recently when a 2022 report on China's military by the U.S. Department of Defense revealed that Beijing has been increasing its military, diplomatic, and political pressure against Taiwan. Specifically, the report reveals that China's actions, at best, have been provocative and destabilizing. The Chinese People's Liberation Army has been focusing on drills that involve seizing islands by force, and they've been flying more bombers, fighters, and other aircraft near Taiwan. In October, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that China might take steps to annex Taiwan on a much faster timeline than previously thought. This has understandably raised concerns about the possible Chinese attack, but the U.S. military believes that invading Taiwan would be extremely difficult for the Chinese army. It could even invite intervention from other militaries and create political and military risks for Chinese leader Xi Jinping and the ruling Chinese Communist Party. But have things always been this bad between Beijing and Taipei? Let's look at the relations between Taiwan and China over the past 4 decades. In the 1980s, Taiwan started relaxing its rules on visits to and investments in China, which improved their relations so much that in 1991, Taiwan officially declared an end to the war with China. China devised a proposal called One Country, Two Systems, which would have given Taiwan some autonomy if it agreed to come under Beijing's control. This same system was used when Hong Kong was returned to China in 1997. However, Taiwan rejected the proposal, and China still considers Taiwan's government illegitimate. But despite this, unofficial representatives from both sides have still held some futile talks. In 2000, Taiwan elected a new president, Chen Shui-bian, who openly favored independence. This caused some alarm for China, and a year after Mr. Chen was re-elected in 2004, China passed an anti-secession law stating that China had the right to use non-peaceful means against Taiwan if it tried to break away from China. In 2008, the KMT's Ma Ying-jeou was elected as Taiwan's president, and he tried to improve relations with China through economic agreements. However, his efforts would be undone in 2016 when Tsai Ing-wen, who leads the independence-leaning DPP party, was elected Taiwan's current president. In 2018, Beijing really turned up the heat on international companies, demanding that if they didn't list Taiwan as a part of China on their websites, they would be blocked from doing business in China. It was a pretty tense time. Fast forward to 2020, and Ms. Tsai was re-elected for a second term with a whopping 8.2 million votes. Many saw this as a snub to Beijing. Meanwhile, over in Hong Kong, there were massive protests against China's increasing influence, and a lot of folks in Taiwan were paying close attention. Later that same year, China went ahead and implemented a national security law in Hong Kong, which many people, including the Taiwanese, saw as yet another example of Beijing flexing its muscles. Moving ahead, how much of an issue is independence in Taiwan? It's been a slow road for political progress between Beijing and Taipei, but the economies of the two have grown significantly. According to Taiwanese official figures, between 1991 and the end of May 2021, Taiwanese investment in China totaled a massive $193.5 billion, or 157.9 billion pounds. This has led to some Taiwanese people getting concerned that their economy has become overly dependent on China on the one hand. On the other hand, others argue that closer business ties could deter China from taking military action against Taiwan due to the economic cost it would incur. A controversial trade agreement in 2014 sparked the Sunflower Movement, where the students and activists occupied Taiwan's parliament in protest against what they saw as China's growing influence over Taiwan. The ruling party in Taiwan, DPP, still officially favors formal independence for Taiwan, while the KMT supports eventual unification with China. Recent polls show that many Taiwanese people support the government's approach to safeguarding national sovereignty, but on the ground, most Taiwanese people seem to fall somewhere in between. A survey in June 2022 found that only a tiny percentage, 5.2%, supported immediate independence, while an even smaller percentage, 1.3%, favored unification with mainland China as soon as possible. The majority of Taiwanese wanted to maintain the status quo in some form, with the largest group preferring to maintain it indefinitely without moving towards either independence or unification. Who recognizes Taiwan? There's a lot of disagreement and confusion surrounding Taiwan and what it is. On the one hand, it has its own constitution, democratically elected leaders, and a significant military presence of about 300,000 active troops in the armed forces. However, things get more complicated when you look at Taiwan's history. The government in exile, led by Chiang Kai-shek, initially claimed to represent the entire country of China and planned to retake control of the mainland. The government was recognized by many Western nations and even held China's seat on the United Nations Security Council. But in the 1970s, some countries began questioning whether the Taipei government could represent the mainland Chinese population. In 1971, the United Nations recognized Beijing as the legitimate representative of China, and in 1978, China began opening up its economy. The United States also established diplomatic relations with China in 1979. Only about 15 countries officially recognize the ROC government diplomatically today, and Taiwan's legal status remains murky. And despite having all the characteristics of an independent state and a different political system, it's unclear whether Taiwan is truly its own country or still part of China. What does the U.S. have to do with the China-Taiwan divide? For a long time, the U.S. has followed a policy of strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan. Essentially, this means that while it officially recognizes Beijing as the only Chinese government, it has also promised to supply Taiwan with defensive weapons and has warned that any Chinese attack would be of grave concern. Recently, in May 2022, President Joe Biden was asked if the U.S. would defend Taiwan militarily, to which he responded with an affirmative answer. However, the White House quickly clarified that the U.S. still maintains its commitment to the One China policy and that its position on Taiwan has not changed. In the past, Mr. Biden has made statements regarding military support for Taiwan, which the White House has later contradicted. The issue of Taiwan has caused tensions between the U.S. and China, with Beijing accusing Washington of supporting Taipei. This has led to increased military jet incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone since Mr. Biden's election. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. What would happen in an actual China-Taiwan war? The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, recently conducted 24 war games to see what a large-scale Chinese invasion of Taiwan might look like, and the results were pretty grim for everyone involved. In this hypothetical scenario, China would start by bombing Taiwan's Air Force and Navy before using its naval forces to surround and lay siege to the island. At the same time, Chinese air assault and airborne troops would land on Taiwan shores, and tens of thousands of soldiers would arrive on cargo ships and military amphibious vessels. However, even with all these efforts, the CSIS studies revealed that Chinese troops would struggle to maintain their supplies and advance inland from the beaches. After all, defending Taiwanese forces would put up stiff resistance, making it difficult for the Chinese military to make progress. And if the US and Japanese forces intervened to aid Taiwan, as is likely the case, they would likely be able to take out China's amphibious fleet, but it would come at a high cost. See, according to the war games conducted by the CSIS, even though Taiwan would likely survive a potential Chinese invasion, it will still sustain significant damage. The island would struggle to maintain essential services like electricity, and its military would be significantly weakened. On the other hand, China would be left with a devastated navy and amphibious force, as well as tens of thousands of soldiers either killed, wounded, or captured. More on this shortly. The think tank also pointed out that for Taiwan to survive, it must withstand the initial Chinese assault and avoid surrendering before the US and partner forces can arrive to provide assistance. Military impact of the China-Taiwan War. It's worth noting that the potential consequences of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be devastating not only for Taiwan, but also for the US and China. The CSIS report states that the high losses damaged the US global position for many years, and China suffered significant losses in the war games. If a Chinese invasion of Taiwan were to occur in 2026, it would have severe implications for all three militaries involved. According to a report titled The First Battle of the Next War, if such an invasion were to occur, the US and Japan would expect to lose dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of service members. There would also be significant losses on the Chinese side, with approximately 10,000 troops killed and 155 combat aircraft and 138 major ships lost. Moreover, the report predicts that about 3,200 US troops would be killed in the first 3 weeks of the conflict. As for Japan, it's likely to lose more than 100 combat aircraft and 26 warships, while US military bases on its home territory come under Chinese attack. And for Taiwan itself, the island's army would suffer about 3,500 casualties, and all 26 destroyers and frigates in its navy will be sunk. Remember, the CSIS ran this war game simulation a total of 24 times, and this report provides the best insights into whether the invasion would succeed or not. The economic impact of a China-Taiwan war. From an economic perspective, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would have significant global ramifications. Taiwan is home to TSMC, the world's biggest chip maker, and the production of everything from cars to iPhones could grind to a halt without their advanced chips. For this reason alone, the potential losses could reach trillions of dollars, and the global economy could face a severe recession. And even if U.S. businesses take steps to reduce their reliance on Taiwan chip making, such as bolstering their inventories and diversifying their supply chains, the risk of a Taiwan crisis cannot be fully mitigated. Due to Taiwan's predominant position in the global semiconductor value chain, any disruption to access Taiwan's semiconductor output would have tremendous consequences for the global economy. According to experts, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could impact the global economy even larger than the 1929 Great Depression. It's no surprise then that Taiwan's military drills to demonstrate combat readiness are closely watched and analyzed by experts worldwide. According to William Allen Reinsch, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, If the US and its allies decided to slap China with significant sanctions on imports after an invasion of Taiwan, it could have a massive impact on the US economy and consumers. But it might be more challenging to impose those kinds of sanctions on China compared to Russia, mainly because of the economic ties between the two countries, says security and tech expert Martine Rasser. There's been talk about what measures the US might take if China invades Taiwan, and one of the possibilities is evacuating the engineers of TSMC, a major chip manufacturer in Taiwan. Destroying their facilities to prevent China from having exclusive access to their production is also on the table. However, Chen Mingtong, the Director General of Taiwan's National Security Bureau, doesn't think this would be necessary. He believes that the US and other countries could simply cut off TSMC's access to the supply chains it relies on to keep production going, making it impossible for TSMC to continue producing chips. As Chen said, even if China got a hold of the golden hen, it won't be able to lay golden eggs. This, along with the potential economic fallout for both China and the rest of the world, could act as a deterrent against an invasion in the short term. How likely is the China-Taiwan War? The CSIS's report on the simulations of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan did not suggest that an attack is inevitable or probable. After all, while the simulations indicated that such an invasion would likely result in a failed campaign and serious economic consequences, it is essential to remember that these were just simulations and cannot predict the future with certainty. The report only serves as a reminder of the potential risks and costs associated with such a scenario. It underscores the need for continued efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region. Other experts seem to agree that despite the increased risk of conflict in the medium term, it's unlikely that a crisis will occur in 2023. For instance, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin stated that although there has been increased vessel activity around Taiwan, he doubts an invasion is imminent. Furthermore, General James Clapper, who previously led the U.S. intelligence community, believes that Chinese President Xi Jinping would only invade Taiwan if he were confident of China's success, which he may not currently be. But assuming worst comes to worst, when will the invasion likely occur? Well, most analysts don't expect China to take the risk of invading Taiwan until later in the decade at the earliest. Some have argued that both China and the U.S. are interested in overplaying the likelihood of a Taiwan invasion, as it gives China more negotiating power and justifies additional military spending in the U.S. Should Taiwan get ready? According to the CSIS report, 4 constants emerged during the war game simulations. 1. The U.S. would need long-range anti-ship missiles to hit the People Liberation Army, or PLA, Navy from a distance and en masse. 2. Taiwan's ground forces must be able to contain the Chinese. 3. The U.S. must be able to use its bases in Japan for combat operations. And 4. Taiwan must be fully armed before the war begins, and the U.S. must enter the conflict with its own forces without delay. Once the war begins, it's impossible to get any troops or supplies onto Taiwan, so it's a very different situation from Ukraine, where the United States and its allies have been able to send supplies continuously to Ukraine, said Mark Kansian, the senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. For this reason, it's in Taiwan's best interest to prepare for a worst-case scenario in advance. Now, what are your thoughts on today's video? Should China and Taiwan unify, or should Taiwan be allowed its independence? Let me know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, smash the thumbs up button and share it widely. And remember to subscribe and turn on notifications to get alerts for future videos like these. Thanks for watching. You've been awesome. Bye.